that's what I didn't do. Okay. All right, everybody can see the screen. It says strings on it.
Yep.
Okay. Let me get the chat up so I can see it. That is one advantage. Here I have my big setup, and I can see all the chat and everybody's picked. Although, like basically, none of you have your cameras on. So as far as I know, you're all sleeping, but that's okay.
I promise I'm not.
That doesn't really matter to me. I get paid either way. I'll find out on the exam whether you're learning anything.
Yeah, hopefully we will.
All right, so let's pop open Eclipse here. I think last time we were kind of doing our crash course. So for today, you were kind of looking a little deeper into what we talked about last class with Java versus Python. Just spending just a couple of minutes on that. Did anybody find anything noteworthy over and above what we discussed in class?
I'm going to say that Java has a lot more support on mobile apps, which I am surprised by since I'd expect, mobile apps to be much more simpler. So simpler programming would be used like Python.
Okay. So let's deconstruct that a little bit. So first of all, I would say it's not fair to say Python is simpler programming than Java. Ultimately, it comes down to right tool for the job. Go back to my statement all the time where I say programming is the skill set, the language doesn't really matter. So Python is a top tier, powerful, loosely typed, general purpose programming language. Nothing weak or anything about Python. Java is a mainstream, compiled but runs through a virtual machine, general purpose, strongly typed, object-oriented programming language. So I put both of these languages on fairly equal footing if they were getting into the boxing ring to fight each other. So ultimately, it comes down to which one is the. Oh, and by the way, if you see me looking up, it's because all of you are on the screen up above me here.
The right tool for the job.
What's this again? Ben?
Which one is the right tool for the job?
Yeah, what's the right tool for the job? What kind of thing are you doing now? You specifically mentioned, Trevor, that that you were surprised to find that Java is so prevalent in mobile applications, specifically Android, right? All the Android applications are written in mobile. So now, one thing to consider, and this was maybe less true, call it 10 years ago when the kind of mobile apps started becoming a thing, but I mean, it's not always true to say that a mobile application is simpler than a desktop or other application. In fact, there are probably some circumstances where, I mean, and we don't need to go into like details or whatever, but I'm guessing that at least some of you have run into a situation where there's something you could do via an app versus something you can do via a web browser on your computer, and you prefer the app version of it. It allows you to do things a better way or a faster way or whatever it is. So mobile apps aren't necessarily simpler. Now, maybe at the video game level, that's probably a true statement, but even then, there's some pretty complex ones for mobile applications. Now, Java specifically, this is the last thing I'll say related to this is, to your point, since mobile applications tend to be maybe a little bit less resource intensive, and our mobile application, our mobile phones, for example, are pretty powerful today compared to what they've historically been. Running a mobile app inside of a virtual machine on your smartphone is actually a pretty decent way to protect the rest of your phone from like crash bugs. Because the last thing you want is for your phone to crash and then you can't get text messages or phone calls or whatever. And we rely on the performance, this processor performance of your smartphone to make the Java application still run fast enough. So it's a security plus kind of modular type thing. But so really, when you say mobile applications, you're really talking about the Android ecosystem runs everything through Java. All right, anything else of interest that you found in your research?
I think this was kind of noteworthy, I suppose. I was looking at, what is Java good for, and then what is Python good for, and while they're both capable of doing a lot of the same things, one thing that I did discover was that Python, because of its versatility and its readability, that it may be easier to articulate like machine learning algorithms than it would be in Java, just because of it's closer to English than Java is, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think the machine learning stuff is the libraries just came out for Python because it's kind of been in this world of data science for a while. So data science, big data, data science, data mining, these are all kind of synonyms for each other. Python has been kind of the development tool for that for a while. And now that our machines have gotten so fast, those tools just evolved to cover machine learning as well. So realistically, it's probably more of right time, right place for why Python got those libraries, and maybe also not so much that Python, the tool, is really any more powerful, but the people who are doing the data science, data mining, now they want to do the machine learning stuff, are already familiar with Python. That's the language of choice for them because they've been using it for a while. So I wouldn't lean on that statement that Java or Python's more English-like than Java. I would still put them in the identical category.
Okay.
But generally speaking, I think what you said is accurate. See, Justin said Python has surpassed Java as an introduction to programming for students across the country. Yeah, I think that's a true statement. And that we talked a little bit about that last semester, how Python is I think I could make a legitimate argument why Python is a terrible first programming language. I could also make a legitimate argument why Python is a good first programming language. And we've talked about some of those things, so just the brief rehash. Python forces indentation, which is good for beginning programmers. So it gets you practiced at doing that. I think Python has somewhat of a wonky syntax for some things because they bolted on object-orientedness. So with that in mind, I think maybe it's not the best starter programming language. Similarly, being a loosely typed language, I think makes beginning programming students not have to go through the process of thinking about what kind of value they are going to store in a variable. So on one hand, you can say, well, this makes life more convenient for the beginning programmer who has enough things to focus on. But at the same time, I think it also then allows you to pick up some bad habits when it comes to defining variables and using variables and things like this. I think getting Python installed and running, I mean, you can write Python code inside of web pages. You just go and find a Python interpreter. Is pretty simple. So, I think at the end of the day, you could probably make a pretty good argument either way. I think Python has a poor default file structure, where Java has a much more defined structure for what a program looks like, which I think also is better for a beginning programmer. So I think you can make a pretty good argument either direction. I would say the main reason we choose Python as our first language is more leveraging this idea that I like having you pivot between languages often. And since Java immediately starts out in an object-oriented manner where you're dealing with classes and Python doesn't, Python kind of gets the nod where I don't have to talk about objects day one. Something along those lines, but I think you can make a pretty good argument either way. Let's see. One thing I didn't know prior to writing this. Yep, that's where. So Ben says that converts it to bytecode. That's actually a newer type thing that allows Python to run inside of its own kind of micro VM for security reasons. Everything is kind of moving in that direction. So with that in mind, that makes that statement of interpreted languages do the translation at runtime. But to your point, it actually happens immediately before runtime and turns into bytecode for the Python virtual machine, which then gets translated in real time to assembly instructions for whatever platform you're on. Choose this, ignore white space. Justin said Java chooses to ignore white space, whereas Python utilizes it. I think there's some truth to that. But Java doesn't ignore white space throughout the whole language. I think what you're maybe implying there is that Java would let you write the entire program on one line if you're willing to read it that way. Because Java doesn't force this indentation thing. So I think that statement's related to indentation. But with that in mind, I think good programming practice should indicate that we should all write code that's well organized, easy to read, shouldn't matter on the language, that kind of thing. Okay, so let's leave it at that. It sounds like we've looked into the whole Python versus Java thing and have a decent idea where these guys fit. Next semester, we're going to be pivoting again, doing C++. Second half of the semester, we'll be doing Android. Okay, so let's jump back in. We were kind of doing a crash course. Now that we remember that human beings solve problems by using our memory, asking questions, and repetition, and 100% of programming languages have facilities for those three things. The idea would be that we want to, now that we're diving into a new language like Java, we want to understand, well, how do I create variables? How do I ask questions? How do I perform repetition? All right, so we started doing this last time. We looked at we're kind of creating a single cheat sheet document for us. So it's a template program that has examples of all these things in there. All right, so this is what a single line comment looks like in Java, as well as C and C++, and C#. This is a multi-line comment in any of those languages. If we're defining variables, variables can follow two different syntax formats. We either have the variable type followed by the variable name equals the value, followed by a semicolon. So one thing that we need to kind of get into our head is that Java requires semicolons at the end of statements, which then is why you could write your entire Java program on a single line, because it knows how to the compiler knows how to parse it based on the end of statements, which can end in either a semicolon or a curly brace. But that doesn't mean you should. Just because you could doesn't mean you should. Okay, you want to write code that's easy to read. So this version of the syntax says define a variable and give it a value all in one line. This other syntax says just define a variable, I'll give it a value later. Okay, so I can define a variable A here. It has no value, but I now have a memory location to store it. I can define a variable B, and I can put a value in there right at the beginning. All right, so that's dealing with variables. All right.
Question, Dr. Littman.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
So the programming template that we made for Java, are you required to write that at the beginning of every program?
You mean
like the
public static thing?
Right. So like the template we use for Python, we could use it, but we didn't necessarily have to. We could have just started the program. I was just wondering, is Java the same way, or are you required?
No, Java, you got to write it this way.
Okay.
Java adheres to my statement that all programs begin and end with main.
Yeah.
Where Python, that's a true statement. It was just hidden from us, and we kind of massaged our format to reinforce that for us. But Java requires it.
Okay.
Okay, and just to kind of close that loop there, Java requires that the class name matches the file name identically, including case sensitivity. But main will always look like this, with the one exception that you can change the name of the variable here if you'd like. But arg stands for arguments, so It's for taking in command line arguments.
Dr. Lippman, I have a question quick.
Yep.
So if you're gonna do like a system out print ln, could you inside the parentheses put a string directly in there, like quotation, a sentence, and then end quotation?
Yep.
Okay. So that's basically our print function.
This is our print function. Did we look at
Okay.
the documentation last time and see that there's a whole bunch of versions of it?
I don't know if we looked at different versions of the print function. I don't believe
Let's
so,
let's
but
go do that. That'll connect some dots for us now that we're going to start talking about strings. So as an example here, if I type in system.out.println B, what is B?
70.
Yep, so B is a variable that resolves to its value, and its value is 70, which is what type?
Integer.
Yeah, it's an integer because that's the kind of value B holds. Okay, so here's a version of println that knows how to print ints. Here's a version of println that knows how to print strings. If I go to the Java documentation, so let's do system Java documentation. So inside of the system class, we're going to have a field called out, which is a print stream. You don't have to worry about what these are now. We're going to follow that rabbit hole. So we went to print stream. Okay, here's the inheritance hierarchy for print stream. A print stream is a filter output stream, which is an output stream, which is an object. All right, these are things like we learned last semester with Python, where we can have things that inherit from other things. We didn't write print stream, it came with Java. We happen to be using it, but this is where it lives in the hierarchy of objects that we don't know how to use at this point. Okay, but we're going to be talking about object here in a second. Remember, just like in Python, when we deal with inheritance, all objects come from this top level hierarchy to this top level tier that is called object. And that's what gives us the most generic form of objects in that language. So we're going to go down here. We're going to find our println methods. Notice here that we have a whole bunch of println methods. So we have more than one method with the same name, but a different number and or type of parameters. All right. Anybody remember what that's called?
What was the question?
Here, I'll write it in here. The question is, what do we call the idea that we can have more than one method with with the same name, but a different number and or type of parameters? I would be surprised if I didn't mention it at some point last semester, but it's possible it was one of these trivia things. Anybody know what this is called? When you have effectively a whole bunch of methods with the identical name, but they take either a different number of parameters or a different kind of parameter, or both. Anybody know what that's called?
Not sure.
So it's called polymorphism. So polymorphism is what we call the idea that we could have more than one method with the same name, but a different number and or type of parameters. So it's an object-oriented term, polymorphism. All right, we're seeing it in action here where we have a whole bunch of methods with the same name. Okay, so this is called println. It takes 0 parameters, returns void. This is println. It takes 1 parameter, that's a Boolean, returns void. This is println. It takes 1 parameter, that's a char, returns void. Okay, but it's the type. You cannot have another version of println that takes a Boolean y for example. Because Java doesn't care whether the variable name is X or the variable name is Y. It cares that this is a function named println that takes a single Boolean as a parameter. That's what it cares about. Okay. So we have a whole bunch of versions of println here. We've seen a couple of them in action today. We have this guy who knows how to print out an integer. And we have this guy who knows how to print out a string. All right. So in my code here, when I did system.out.println and I passed it the string LOL, it called the version of println that knows how to print strings. Similarly, and this goes to your question, you asked, can you just put a string directly in here? So I'll help you. I already gave you the answer. The answer is yes, but I'll help you answer the reason why you can do that. What is name2?
It's a string, Mike.
Okay, so name2, let's really get to the details of it. Name2 is a variable.
Variable, yeah.
The variable. Variables contain values. So if this variable name2 resolves to its value, right? And you said its value is Mike. So as far as we're concerned, name2 is a placeholder and at runtime resolves to exactly that. So ultimately, it will print out just a string. These two lines now look very similar, right? Your question is, can I do this? My answer is, you are already doing that. You were already.
Well, yeah, I understand that. I was just wondering.
Became a string.
Yes.
All right. So we want to think about how these things ultimately resolve, and I'll even give you another example of that. So let's just leave it at that for right now with this println stuff.
So because it knows how to print an integer that's already built into it, we could do system.out.println and then put the number 70 inside the parentheses, and it should print out 70 for us.
Yep, for the exact same reason.
Okay. Yep. Okay.
Because this guy is a variable that ultimately turns into 70.
Right.
So putting a B there is just the same thing as putting a 70, except I can change the value of B someplace else when 70 is always 70.
Okay.
All right, so let's talk about a couple of the things that strings know how to do. Do I already have it in here? I might have it in here already. Oh, let's just write it anyways. Oh, here it is. All right, so let's look at some of the things that strings know how to do. Now, if I go to the Java documentation and I go to, let's just do Java string class. So here's the Java documentation, which we'll get very good at reading, so I'm not going to go too much into that right now. But you notice here's a bunch of stuff that strings know how to do. All right, not an infinite number of things, but a good chunk of things. All right, several of these things are going to be kind of our common go-to moves. So I've given you 3 of them to start with that kind of mimic some of the stuff we did last semester. So one of the things here is we have a function called length. So if I were to print out name2 dot length, name2 dot, am I spelling it? So name2 dot length, this will give me the number of characters inside of the string that name2 holds. Keep in mind, this is going to give me, well, let me ask you this. Is that allowed? Based on the answers we've been given here last couple
I would
minutes?
say yes,
Okay, explain why.
because all we're doing is trying to print the length of that string.
Okay, that doesn't tell me why this will work versus not work. I know what we're trying to do, but tell me why will this be legal? And the
Well,
answer
because
can't be
the
there's
string
no red squiggly.
to print, we have the the functionality to print a string. And so if you're going to put a string within those parentheses and then do dot length, it's just going to do the same thing that it would do if you were to do name2 dot length.
Why? Why would
Why?
things ultimately do the same thing?
Because they're both strings.
Name2 is a variable that will
Right.
ultimately boil down to Mike, right?
Right. Yeah. I
Now
just
they
couldn't
look-
articulate it well enough, I guess.
Now they ultimately look the same, even though before I used a placeholder for my string. See, the reality is a lot of programmers will look at this and say, oh, well, this just looks funny. I'm calling it directly with a string. Well, why am I hard coding a string and calling the length method? Can't I just count this and say that the number of characters in LOL is 3 and just put a 3 in there? Absolutely. I mean, this thing's going to give us a 3 for that guy. There's our 3, right? But we might not know how many characters are in something if I bang on the keyboard a bunch, and that one happened to have 43 in it from banging on the keyboard. So when we want to know the number of characters that are in a string, we can ask that string to report to us the number of characters that are in there. Okay, so that's the length method. Similarly, we have a char at method, system.out.println, and let's go with name2.char. Oops. Name2.char at, let's do 3. So it's indexed just like Python is. It's a 0-based index. So if the length of something is 5, the legal buckets are 0 to 4, just like it was in Python. So name2 is the string Mike. Bucket 3, this is bucket 0, 1, 2, 3. So this is going to be our E. This will give me the character at bucket 3. This is similar in Python to saying name2 at bucket 3.
Cool.
And let me just go back to an LOL here. This is the same in Python as saying LOL. The length of LOL. Make sense?
Yep.
All right. Then the last one I want to show you is something called index of system.out.println name2.index of. Something's up with my Eclipse installation, because when I say name2 dot, it should give me the list of parameters that are part of string. There are a list of methods that are in there, and it's, I don't know, it's giving me something something else. So I probably just need to restart it at some point. Looks like it's got something funky going on. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's working for me to print
Oh
or
yeah,
to
yeah.
show me the options.
Good. I've seen this before. It's just a stupid thing. I'll get it fixed. Name2 index of, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in a, let's actually put in the K. That was a capital O. All right. So index of, what this does is it tells me the location of K the first time I find a location of K inside of name2. And if I remember correctly, this was what, name2.find K in
I believe
Python.
that might be it. Yeah, something like that at least.
Yep. So we looked at the find command in Python. I don't think it's find name2K, but whatever, something like that. So we looked at find last semester, and index of kind of does the same thing. It returns the position in a string where a character occurs first, or if I say index of R, it's going to give me a -1. Returns -1 if it was not found. So there's my E. It found a K at bucket 2, and it didn't find an R. There's my -1. All right, that makes some sense.
Yep.
All right, so that's our length method. That's our char at method. There's our index of method. So pretty quickly you can, do some things with strings. We'll get there fairly fast here where we're going to be looking at the documentation, but here's just some, lay up string functions that you're going to help you do quite a few things pretty quickly.
I just have one more question about like the index of.
Yep.
So if you were to like, is there a way to put a tuple in the parentheses, like after the E or after the R, let's just say, like do a tuple and then somehow select like to find the last bucket or something like that? Or
there's another method called last index of.
okay. All right.
So here's multiple versions of the same method. So I can give it a character to look for. I can give it a character and then I can tell it where to start searching. Let's say you want to get the, let's say it starts with an A, but you want to get the next occurrence of an A. So you can start from bucket 1.
Okay.
For example,
Could you share that link in chat? Thank you.
And I just got to it by just doing Java string documentation.
Okay.
We'll be looking at this plenty. All right, so don't worry about this too much. And then see, there's some other ones, last index of, things like that. So lots and lots of tools. Obviously, you can't memorize the entire language. So you want to be able to read the documentation, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time focusing on reading documentation. So we won't get into that right now because that has to do with the whole static keyword thing that last time I said, just kind of don't worry about that for right now. Right now, we're just trying to map our brains over to Java from Python so we can start running down the kind of intermediate programming path using Java. We're just familiarizing ourselves with the language. Okay. So there's some string functions that allow you to do a lot of things. One of the things I like to think of for Java that is different than a lot of languages, Python works okay for this statement as well, but Java is what I like to call a string-based language. If you can get something into string format, it is extremely malleable when it comes to strings. If I can get something in a string in Java, I can do almost anything with it. And we're going to see plenty of examples of that during the semester. So again, just take my word for it right now. But we can turn ints into strings and strings into ints and all sorts of stuff. And I know we did that in Python last semester, but it's even more powerful in Java. All right. So there's our, let's call it our primer for our string class. Talked about polymorphism, Boolean operators. We already started talking about that last time. We introduced conditionals. So just like in Python, we would say if some Boolean expression, then that, we have our true expression. Optionally, we have our false expression. All right, so that's kind of our Python-y version of this. So if we were writing this exact same code in Python, we would say if b less than 10, print that, else print that. So here's Python's structure version of the same thing here in Java. The big difference is Java will let you do things like this. You'll find in a lot of textbooks, they actually will put the opening curly brace up on the same line as the if statement. Originally, that idea came from trying to save a couple of lines of code or save some space for printing. Now it's kind of gotten adopted as a coding standard. I do not like this standard. I'm never going to take points off if you write it with this, but I prefer to see the curly brace, the opening curly brace and the closing curly brace above each other, and then everything indented inside of it. Exactly like Python forces you to do. That makes sense?
Yep.
But Java's perfectly happy if you just put everything here on just one big old line. Java doesn't care. Java's fine with that.
Wow.
A human being wouldn't be. We're going to look at that and say that's really hard to read, but Java doesn't care. And I think that's what Justin was talking about when he said it ignores white space. Is this specific kind of example here where it's like, look, if you want to shove everything here, we can take this extra white space out here. We can get rid of that. You really go to town with this in Java, and then you're going to be just fine. All right, make some sense?
Yep.
But just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. All right, so this is a lot easier to read. You've already practiced for a semester with Python indenting stuff. Now you actually can follow through with continuing with indentation, even though Java's not going to force you to do it. Okay. So Boolean expressions. We have Boolean operators. Our Boolean operators. Let's call this Boolean arithmetic operators. Are less than, greater than, less, well, let's just do less than or equal to, greater than, or equal to, not equal to, and equal to. All right. Same thing as actually, let's see, in Python 3. Was that how not?
I think not equals was one as well that you could use.
In Python 2, then they actually use the word not.
Yeah, and I think that's still carried over into Python 3, like you could still use it.
Oh, you could do both?
Yeah.
All right, so these are the Boolean arithmetic operators. These other ones are the Boolean logical operators. So that is and, or. And I'm going to go ahead and show you something else. I think I showed it to you last semester, but even if I didn't, we'll see it again. Let me just show you something down here. So if I say system.out.println 7 less than 10, that should give me a true, right? This probably wouldn't make tons of sense to ever write this. I'm just hard coding some stuff, but it is true that 7 is less than 10, so I'll get a true statement printed out here. There's my true. If I say 7 greater than 10, we get a false. If I say 7 less than, well, let's say 7 greater than 10, or let's say something like B mod 2 is equal to 0. This is effectively saying, is B even? So if 7 is greater than 10 or B is even, print something out. What is B currently? B is currently 70, which is even. So this will be 7 is not greater than 10. That's false. B is even. That's true. False or true will be true. So there's my true statement for that. All right. That's or. That's and. So now this is false. This is true. False and true is false. So there's our false. Now the mistake, I'm going to throw 2 more operators up here. A single ampersand and a single vertical bar. Let's do anybody know what's going to print out with that? And keep in mind, from a beginner programmer perspective, well, first of all, this wouldn't have made tons of sense putting numbers on either side. It will here in a second, but the beginning programming perspective on this is you accidentally only put 1 vertical bar instead of 2 when you meant to put an or. Okay, so you made a typo, but instead of Java screaming at you, it worked. It just didn't give you something that you understand. Anybody know what the output of this would be and why?
I'm not sure what it would be. Is it going to automatically default to or?
Nope.
Okay.
So we got a 7 out of that. And you might say, well, why did I get a 7? What if I put a 4? We still got a 7 out of that. Why did I get a 7? All right, so this is what's actually happening. Did I say anything about Bitwise? Yeah, I say the Bitwise one's in here. So what it's actually doing, so here is, let's go down to this one, 2 and 7. I'll make sure that my example matches that. So this is a 2, this is a 7. We'll print it out and we get a 7. Question is why do we get a 7? This is the bitwise or function. Now, several of you are in 325 this semester, right? With
Yep.
Dr. Buckler? One of the things you'll do in there is bitwise operations with registers. The number 2 in binary is written this way, 0, 1, 0, in 3-bit binary. The number 7 is written this way, 1, 1, 1. Okay, everybody remembers that? How to convert a decimal number to a binary number?
Yep.
Bitwise OR says perform the OR operation on each bit. So this is a 0 or a 1, which is a 1. This is a 1 or a 1, which is a 1. This is a 0 or a 1, which is a 1. Or says at least one of the bits has to be a 1 in order for them both to be a 1. That's why we get a 7 here. If we do 2 and 7, we get a 2. Why did we get a 2? 2 and a 7. Here's our binary version of 2. Here's our binary version of 7. False and true is false. True and true is true. False and true is false. 0, 1, 0 is a 2. Make sense? Now,
Yes.
for us, we're going to go ahead and say we will rarely write bitwise operations in business logic code. So realistically, this is not something that you're going to see very often. Okay, it's not that it's unimportant. it's something that computer scientists should all understand. And you might run into a situation, specifically if you're doing systems programming stuff, writing operating systems, that kind of stuff, working on the Linux kernel, where this kind of stuff might be helpful. Sometimes we use it to like map or mask values is what something like that is called. You'll talk about that like in the networking class. But I would say from a normal programmer's perspective, especially a beginner intermediate programmer perspective, this is more likely to happen when you accidentally use a single ampersand rather than a double ampersand. All right, so know that these exist. I'm not going to test you over it because it's not an applied skill, but I do want you to remember that this exists. All right, makes sense? All right, so for Wednesday, I'm not going to give you a graded assignment for Wednesday, but go ahead and practice doing this stuff inside of Java, just making sure, because I'm going to throw a Java programming assignment at you pretty quickly. So on your own time, start practicing converting between your Python knowledge and your Java knowledge. Make sense? All right,
Yeah.
I will see everybody on Wednesday. And for those of you who want to show up 9 p.m. tonight in this Zoom room, I'll play some ladder climbing Hearthstone game, and hopefully I won't suck too bad. We'll see if we can hit legend.
Sounds good.
All right, take care.
Professor, I
Have a good day, Mr. Lowman.
I have one quick question.
Sure.
About like in Python we could like using the print function we could like throw variables in if we like separate it with commas. Does that work too, or do you have to specify it as something different?
No, there's things you can do like that in Java.
Okay, all right, that's all I was curious about.
Yep, and some of these things, the first time we bump into it, because I obviously am not going to be able to predict every little thing we're going to do, but the first time we bump into something we haven't seen before in Java, I'll explain all this stuff.
Okay.
If you want to pull off what you're talking about and you want to look into it, a couple things to look into. One is system.out.format. I think it's called system.out.format, which will allow you to create a formatted string, which is kind of like an F string.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Python. And then you can also just do string concatenation like we did before.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Cool.
Yep.
Good question, Sean.
All right. Catch y'all later.